check all these technical elements. And as we're going from one talk to the other, it was impossible to do it before. So thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about an issue which is quite a dramatic one. So we're having these talks on the side of the UN Human Rights Council, its 57th session, where the Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights presented his report. And the work of Special Rapporteurs is, of course, to look at the general issues and to do thematic reports, but also to do country visits, to see what is the situation in different countries and bring a number of recommendations that can help the country to implement better the protection of human rights on the ground. The Special Rapporteur did make a visit to Australia and presented his report at this session of the Human Rights Council. During his visit, the Special Rapporteur did meet the communities in Western Australia, and particularly Mr. Maitland Parker, who unfortunately since then passed away. So the real focus here of this discussion is first to pay tribute to the elder of the Banjima community, and to the struggle that was really the struggle of his life for himself, but for his own community, and also to see a situation of a very important gravity, because it is estimated that in the area with the impact of asbestos, leftovers from previous industry operations, it is estimated, some studies are estimating the number of victims up to 2,000, which is a huge number. And it still today is affecting people on the ground. So this is a very, very serious issue that has been raised and mentioned in the report. And before I give the floor to the Special Rapporteur to open this discussion, I'd just like to underline that Australia answered to the report in the interactive dialogue yesterday or the day before yesterday, and welcomed the report, which is something very, very good to hear. Not all states do that. And not only did they welcome the report, but they say that the recommendations were useful and relevant, and that they are starting to work on some of these recommendations. So we know the situation is extremely severe. It's a very big challenge. But it's interesting to see that at least the authorities have acknowledged it and have welcomed the report and are saying that they want to work on this. So having said that, I'd like to give the floor immediately to the Special Rapporteur, Marcos Orellana, so that he can give us a word from his visit to Australia and how he sees the situation. Marcos, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yves, and thanks to all who are joining us in the room and online. So a couple of words on my visit to Australia. First of all, I wish to thank once again the government of Australia for its kind invitation to visit the country, and for excellent cooperation. And this may sound like a boilerplate, but I in this particular instance, I think it's really remarkable the extent of engagement, the way that not only at the federal government, but at the various states and territories that I had the chance to interact with authorities. At every turn, there was an open dialogue, a constructive dialogue, and I think this is now reflected in the report I had the opportunity to present in the interactive dialogue a couple days ago. I also point that I'm very pleased that Australia has intervened to welcome the report, to welcome the recommendations, and even more so, I'm really pleased that several of the recommendations have already been acted upon, and many others are in the works. The question of methyl bromide, for example, that had been for years outstanding, or the implementation reports on the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants. There's many more. But going to one of the key findings of my report on my official country visit to Australia is is the big divide in the narrative. So while government authorities highlight the efforts they are taking to protect people and the environment from the harms and risks of toxics and exposure, the perception in civil society and indigenous peoples is of a government that's co-opted by corporate interests and that operates to favor them. And this divide in the narrative is opens a chasm where dialogue becomes very difficult. And one of my hopes, even goals in this work and in this report is to be able to begin helping set bridges so that this dialogue can foster greater communication. In regards to the situation of indigenous peoples in Australia, this divide is pronounced, is heavily pronounced, and that is a result of painful experiences in the past of denial, of invisibility, of targeting and discrimination. When it comes to, for example, the impacts of uranium mining, when it comes, for example, to the discussions on where to site repositories of radioactive wastes in indigenous people's lands or affecting those lands and territories. When it comes to the government distributing pesticides, hazardous pesticides with dioxins that have then resulted in very serious impacts on indigenous peoples. When it comes to the legacy of nuclear testing that has been conducted by the government of the United Kingdom in Australian territory, largely without advance notice of indigenous peoples that have many suffered severely from those impacts, many gone blind, many lost their lives, and so there are many open scars in indigenous people's memories, and that I heard in not in one state but in across the Australian continent and the Commonwealth. In that context, asbestos is a particularly serious issue because of the known impacts that asbestos fibers can have on the human body. I'd like to point out that one of the key challenges, or perhaps most difficult challenges in toxics and human rights, is dealing with legacy. So there are certainly new issues coming up, and just now we talked about forever chemicals and PFAS, and now we're also going to be talking about plastic pollution, which is relatively not new. But one of the big impacts of the legacy is that problems don't just go away. Sometimes they get worse over time. They aggravate. If there's inaction, they aggravate. And when it comes to asbestos, despite the efforts by government, which have been significant, there has been significant effort in governmental authorities in dealing with this legacy, but the problem is so big and so huge that the impacts remain. And so dealing with the legacy of asbestos in Australia is serious. I do want to highlight a couple of good practices, as some states have prioritized removing asbestos from priority locations, schools, for example, and so that's a good practice that can be followed in other parts of the world. It's very expensive, however, and so in many developing countries, there's just very little resources to take that on. But it is a good practice. Some areas that have been heavily hit have been closed off in order to prevent precisely the kind of exposure that can kill people. Closing off an area is, in a way, a temporal solution, as cleanup and other action are needed. So this again goes to speak to the concept of sacrifice zone. I think I'll stop there, but before I do, Eve, I do want to echo your words that this session is also to pay tribute to Mr. Parker, to his advocacy over so many years in making visible the impact of asbestos on Indigenous peoples and on his community, on himself as well. And in so doing, raising the situation of Indigenous peoples more generally in Australia. With that, I'll go back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. So we'll now turn to our friends who are in Australia, and thank you very much for being with us for this discussion. We will be, as we are now dealing with a very specific situation, one location in Australia particularly hit by this legacy that, as you were mentioning, Marcus. We are going to have a small vision of what is happening in the ground. And we had the pleasure to have with us Yara Boumelem, who is a producer, a film producer, and who is preparing a documentary on the situation. And she very kindly agreed to share a few images so that here we can have a view of what we are talking about and see what is at least have a view of what is the situation on the ground. Yara, thank you for being with us. Thank you for helping us in preparing this event. Would you like to say a few words before we present the video, and afterwards we will have the testimonies of the Parker family and from the Bajima community, and then afterwards we will be also hearing a number of other eminent Indigenous Australian personalities. Yara, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you very much, Yves, for organising this, and Dr. Marcus Orellana for being available to talk. I just wanted to pick up on something that you said, Dr. Orellana, about invisibility. And I think I didn't quite appreciate before I started making this documentary with the late Maitland Parker, this concept of invisibility. For a very long time, as far back as I can see, when going through the archives, with the newsreels, with government reports, the perspectives of Banjima have not been considered when it comes to Witanum. The first time that we could find the perspectives of Banjima aired about their country, about their traditional homelands and the contamination that has happened on their country is in 2021 in a news report that was aired on Indigenous television in Australia. The first time that we hear about Banjima's perspective in government reports is when they lobbied very hard to become part of a steering committee that is dealing with this very issue. And it was only in the recent, in the last 4 or 5 years that they were able to take part in a consultative way, actually have a seat at the table. And I think the reason why you find right now on this talk a large representation of Banjima who are on this talk is for this reason, that the voices of Banjima have not been heard. So I want to thank you, Dr. Marcus Orellana, for interviewing Maitland. I didn't realize at the time just how monumental that was. There are very few people who have actually consulted the Banjima about Witanum, the largest contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere. And thank you for also airing this discussion. I will vacate the panel after this so that Banjima can have their perspectives heard. I think it is only fitting that they have the opportunity to speak to you about this. You'll have 3 board directors from the Banjima Native Title Aboriginal Corporation and the chairperson, and the CEO is actually on board as well. And we also have Maitland's daughters who are speaking from a very special place, from Karijini National Park, their home, and the heartland of Banjima country. And we also have a very significant elder, Timmy Parker, who lives just a few kilometres from the contamination zone in a community, Yongalina community, just moments away from the contamination zone. So thank you very much for this, and I hope it's a very fruitful discussion for everyone.
Whitnam, Ngambiguna is the worst contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere.
What a devastated sight to see. Yolonia, minor mangalin and asbestos, all this rubbish, all the tailings. I'll go down to Yolo, finish. Why Yolo? Why is it a mangalin in here? I'll go Yolo, yeah, go away mangalin up.
This tumor here is growing despite treatment. It's double the amount that it was before.
My biggest worry is the young generation.
Hey, we got to put a thing there.
Push it down, Dean. Go like this, look with your hand. Anybody, whether they're Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, is to talk about it and make government accountable.
Country was perfect until they mined it.
Country is my soul. It's my life. That gives me breath to carry on my legacy. I'm a bloody 70-year-old man and still cry for country.
Thank you very much for having shared with us these images, which give us a possibility to see the scope, at least have a glimpse at what is the scope of the challenge that you're facing as a legacy from the asbestos leftovers of a mine that was operating until 1966, but is still today contaminating so many people and making this whole area, beautiful area, totally poisonous and where you cannot stay anymore. I would like to give the floor, I'm proposing to give the floor to Corinne Parker, the daughter of Maitland Parker. But please, here I'm addressing the words to the whole of the Banjima community. If ever we're going to proceed differently, don't hesitate to do so. We're here to listen to you and to hear your testimonies. So may I ask, is it possible for Corinne perhaps to take the floor? Making sure that we can hear you. Okay. So can Corinne, can you, would you like to take the floor? Okay, so Mark, we can't hear you here, so.
I believe, here we go.
There it goes. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
I'm Corinne. I've got my two sisters here with me, Renira and Carmel. And you can't see our mum in the picture, but she's here as well, Margie. Everything is really still raw to us. Just looking at that short film there now, it's very emotional. Dad, sorry. Oh dear. Yeah,
Right.
Dad's biggest focus was the cleanup for Whitnam. He ended up getting sick back then in 2016 from the asbestos from living on country, from the tailings that was in Vietnam, that's still in Vietnam. And we really need that area to be cleaned up, that country to be healed, for our future generations to come back to country. Vietnam is, we cannot enter in, it's too dangerous for everybody, especially for us country, for us Banjima people. We, yeah, it's really hard. So the biggest focus was Dad wanted that place to be cleaned up before we lose more of our family members. You know, we lost a lot of family members because of that asbestos there. It's not just our families, it's sort of everyone that worked there and lived there, yeah. And the biggest concern as well is we got families down the road from Vietnam. You know, we live over the hill in Karajini, but we got families down the road in Yangalina. And that's a big concern too. You know, we need that place cleaned up for everybody.
Yep.
Oh.
Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for your testimony. It is striking to see first since how long this is going on, and that the area is, as we were talking a bit the previous talk with the special rapporteur, it has become really a sacrifice zone where it's not possible to go anymore. So this is really absolutely dramatic. It's a loss of land, but it's also the loss of your land and your own sovereignty on this area. So definitely this is a very dramatic issue. And thank you for being with us. We really think it's, I mean, basically, if we're able to talk and to have this discussion here from Geneva and you in Australia and with the special rapporteur, it is largely thanks to the battle and to the struggle of Maitland Parker, who has made this issue visible and understandable. And so now we're able to see that this is an issue that needs to be discussed. And of course, we will continue here from Geneva to talk with the Australian authorities about this issue and keep up at least what we can do on our side here in Geneva. So once again, thank you very much for being with us and for your testimony. Let me turn now to Mark. And Mark Gregson, you are also with a number of other people from the community. I know that we have some leaders of the Bajima community with us. I think Jonel is with us, if I'm correct. Can other members of the board and of the community perhaps also give their own views and testimony about the situation they are facing right now?
Yeah, thank you. Just so everybody is aware, we have Janelle Parker online, Delvine Parker online, and Paula White online, who are all directors of the Banjima Corporation Board. And sitting next to me is Mr. Timmy Parker, who is a senior Banjima elder and lives at the Yangalina community. So perhaps I'll pass to Mr. Parker to speak for a moment on his views on the asbestos and the contamination at Wittenoom. Timmy, okay. Speak.
Yeah, good day, everyone. Oh, good evening. It's evening time here in West Australia. And everyone can hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Yeah. We had, it's been years. Say, I think maybe back in, in the early 2000s, we had a committee in respect to this issue now with Wittenoom. And, we came down to Perth numerous times in regards to trying to discuss and make it happen back then before the loss of our people. And I'm speaking in regards to our mother, my mother. She passed on with that many years ago, you know, because of our people that lived on country for many, many years, but before our late, since we moved away from those areas, but I still do live at the community, like the lady spoke the other before, First Lady, yeah, you know. Yeah. And, you know, it's not just basically Whitnam Gorge, it's right across the Hamersley Ranges. You know, it's opposite where I live, you know, and it'd be ideal, I think, before, like Dora said, before we lose more people in respect to this horrible disease, that I think those places should be identified with the traditional people of that area, to actually people come and visit the areas and actually see what I'm talking about, you know, because it's very hard to speak about country when you're not on country. I believe it's very important for all of us, and my 3 daughters there, and brothers, daughters, but they are my daughters too, you know, in respect to late brother. And I think this issue should have been brought forward many, many years ago in regards to the loss of our old people too, that, you know. But I think my daughters may know, but my mother, their grandmother, she passed on with that too, you know, many years ago. And that's what brought to our attention. And even with our Greg Tucker, you know, that's why he got cut out at that time. And we lost him, and he was a young man. So there's a lot of young people that lived on country and worked on country, you know, back in the late 50s and that, or late 70s, sorry, and now, you know, have passed on. So it's a serious issue, I think, should bring the government and the whole world to attention. That I believe it's a matter of, it's a cleanup act, and I think who was responsible for it, you know, they should be accountable too in regards to the cleanup. How can we talk? We're not going to be talking every time we want to do something. The action should be taken to clean what's there now. And you know, sometimes it's give us, now it's starting to give us not our rights to go into those places now, where it's, you know, in our cultural way that, you know, we have significant areas in those gorges that we'd like to share and tell stories about with our grandchildren and our kids, our children. And it's very important for our children and the future generation to, you know, hear that from us before we leave. And I think it's very important. I think we should organize something on the ground, so it's visually shown to people such as you guys on the other end of the world. Virginia, well, what place? Geneva, Switzerland, you know. And I've got a great friend who's from Austria, and he's, you know, he lived in Whitnam, and he still comes back home. He lives in Perth now, but while I speak now, he's back home, you know. And he lived in Whitnam for many, many years too. And he still comes back to visit Whitnam and the community and our people. Maybe someone should, while he's up there next time during the summer season, because it's so cold down here in Perth, that we should organize that we could get Mario to sit with us and all together and let him tell his story too, because, and he's a man from Austria. And I appreciate everyone that's listening and be around this talk this evening. And thanks for having me here. And you know, I was caught off guard, but I made my effort and my time to be here with you all. And I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parker, and we really appreciate that the time you're spending with us and to give also your own testimony. Mark, and you were saying you have also other members of the board of the Bajima community with you. Do they want to also share a few elements and share their views with us?
Yes, I think that would be good. They're not actually physically in the boardroom with us. They're online from up in Tom Price, which is near Banjima country. We have Janelle Parker, who perhaps would be good to go and speak next, and then potentially after that Delvine Parker. And we also have Paula White, who's the chair of the Banjima board.
Okay, so I'll turn to Jamel. Due to time constraints, we'll have to ask for rather short interventions, but really looking forward to hear Jamel. Jamel. Yes, please. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hello to the sisters. They're not far from me. They're about what, two hours drive away. I think for me the biggest thing through this film and seeing Uncle and the things that he's talked about for country is the stories that the oldies tell us about their time in Whitlam and how when they were removed from their homelands, they had to go into a space like Whitlam and then work in the tailings. And our grandparents worked in Yampai Gorge, which is not in the national park, across the road from Youngalina. And then it's not just the Banjima community, it's also traditional owners that had to live around the area. For me, when family find out that they have the sickness from Whitlam, they say, and this will always stick with me, they say to me, you know, I got a little bit of Whitlam in me, which is a story of connection to their country, connection to their families, but the stories of how that's impacted on them through their generations. And like my sisters have said there, it's important for us to maintain those connections because the buildings may have been buried, but the legacies of the pain and the hurt that our families have suffered and continue to suffer is forever. We always worry that, you know, who is that next elder that is not going to be sitting at our table telling us the stories of how such a huge environmental impact has happened on Banjima country is going to affect us in real time. So
I'm afraid we have a connection issue here. I'm not sure we heard the very final words you wanted to say, Janelle. Mark, you said also that we had also Mr. White and Paul White, right? And Delvin Parker. We're trying to make sure that we can find them to open the mic to them.
Apologies, I understand Paula White has not been able successfully to join online, and my apologies, it's Delvine Hicks, but she is a director of the Banjima Aboriginal Corporation, and she is a Banjima person.
So Delvin,
she might be connected with another name.
I'm not sure if she's online.
Is Delvin connected under her name? Because we only see here in the list of the people attending, we just see the name, the first names basically. So just to make sure that we can give her the floor. Well, perhaps while we're still looking for that, I'd like to turn to Dr. Anna McGlade. Dr. McGlade, you're a member of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and you're very familiar with this. How do the international system and international law can help the recognition of the indigenous people, and how it can help to deal with the issue that they're facing, like the one we're hearing about right now, what's happening in Wittenoom. May I turn to you to have your views and perhaps some elements you'd like to share with us and share with the Special Rapporteur?
Thank you, Reeves, and much respect and love to the Bunjima family. It was a great honour to know Maitland and to see that his legacy of work is coming through with the film. And I hope that we can also bring your voices to the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues, which I'm a member of, just for one more year. And we meet in New York every April for a couple of weeks. And I'd like to let you know that the theme of next year's session is implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I've just had another look at the declaration, and Article 29 speaks exactly to the situation of Bunjima people affected by Wittenoom and asbestosis, about the toxics and the effects of on Indigenous people's lands, and the requirement of states to take effective measures to ensure that programs for monitoring, maintaining and restoring the health of Indigenous peoples as developed and implemented by the peoples affected by the materials are duly implemented. It's positive to hear that the Australian government has accepted some recommendations from the Special Rapporteur's report, and it's really great to see that the report has focused on this particular situation, which is so severe and ongoing. You know, we had a Senate inquiry last year led by retired Senator Pat Dodson into the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Australia. And one of the key recommendations was for the development of a national action plan in Australia. We're not in the situation of Canada, which has actually passed legislation to require the states throughout Canada and the federal government to report on implementation of UN declaration rights. The Bunjima people were a part of a communication that we made to the UN Committee on Race Discrimination a couple of years now in regards to the WA Heritage Act and its denial of the right of free, prior, informed consent, and the destruction of Aboriginal cultural and heritage sites that's been ongoing under that piece of legislation. I think we can continue to call Australia to account and to ensure our participation also in UN mechanisms in person as well as remotely like this. But I just wanted to, I didn't know I was speaking today, but just thank you for inviting me, Mark, and good to see people and to hear about this very important film being made. And we should keep the pressure up on this situation, and I'd like to promote it if I can, assist with the Human Rights Commission and through our Indigenous media, because we do now have within the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade an Indigenous ambassador and Indigenous staff who are responsible for highlighting these issues, but of course many grave human rights abuses are taking place across our country. And I'd like to obviously encourage our ongoing participation in the UN mechanisms, and hopefully with Bunjima people, if you would like to take part in the permanent forum next year, to continue monitoring the report of the Special Rapporteur in regards to your own situation. I'd be really, I think that would be excellent. Thanks.
McGlade, we are getting to the end of this of the talk, and again, apologies for the technical difficulties we had at the very beginning. But Mark, thank you very much for helping to do all of these connections. Is there a final word you would like to say before I turn to the Special Rapporteur for a word of conclusion? Oh, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yes, sorry, apologies. Yes, just very briefly. So in my all of my interactions with the traditional owners and the Banjima people. Whenever we talk about this issue about Whitnam, just to convey and give some context, aside from the very important issue about the health-related issues, the other important aspect about this is the deprivation of access to that country, to that part of their country where it's culturally and spiritually very significant to them. So as a result of no longer being able to go there due to the risks of asbestosis, they can't go and practice their traditional law and culture and pass on that knowledge to the younger generation. So there's that risk of loss, and that, which is another very important aspect of this story.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. This, I mean, this discussion and I would say some of the difficulties we had are a clear indication of the severity of the situation on the ground, how wide is the area which is concerned, and precisely the difficulty to have access to such a wide area when the damage is so severe. And it shows, I mean, if we decided to spend some time on this, it's precisely because we're trying to see how much the UN process here can help to bring together all of the goodwill and energy which is needed so that reparation can happen on the ground. Definitely here it is highly needed, and we should never accept that any area of any size could be sacrificed like this, because it means not just land being sacrificed, but it means people and a whole culture and a whole tradition which is being sacrificed, and this is not acceptable. So we hope that this first discussion here we're having, the report of the Special Rapporteur and all the follow-ups we'll be able to do will help to push to have more energy given to the cleaning of the site. Having said that, I will turn to the Special Rapporteur, perhaps for a final word of conclusions. Marcus, you see the impact of your reports. We see how the work done by special procedures when they do country visits can really help the discussions on the ground and can help the different process. I think it's really a very clear view we're having with this discussion. So final concluding word from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves, and thanks to all who have taken the floor to share their views and impressions. I'll make 3 points. The first one is that for many years, Australia exported asbestos to other countries in the region, and that's not an isolated case. Asbestos is still a global problem, despite the knowledge that we have on the hazardous properties and health impacts of asbestos. The key instruments in the chemicals and waste cluster internationally have not been able to take that science and knowledge and align it with the regulatory protections that are needed. I'm referring in particular to the Rotterdam Convention on International Trade in Industrial Chemicals and Pesticides, where conference of the parties after conference of the parties has been unable to list asbestos as a controlled substance so that it may be subject to the key control mechanism of that instrument, which is prior informed consent. In the most recent conference of the parties, Australia led a proposal for an amendment that would have introduced a new annex that would have tried to break down the paralysis and the failure of that instrument to take in the science policy interface in collaboration with Switzerland. But it was defeated. It was defeated by the chemical lobby. It was defeated by commercial interests like Russia, by India, and other countries had put their economic interest above the health of people. That's the first point. There's still an open agenda here internationally that needs to be addressed. Secondly, the situation in Whitnam and Australia in this regard, I think it also exemplifies the limits, perhaps even the failures of environmental law as it has been practiced and developed since the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment. We as humanity, we have become very good at assessing risks, at dealing with management of environment, and often the conclusion is that the risk may be acceptable and projects do go forward. But the human impact, the human cost, and the impacts on the realization of human rights is not sufficiently accounted for. And that is where a human rights-based approach can be a game changer, because no one can be sacrificed for the sake of an economic project. That is the promise of human rights, that no one is left behind, that the right to life is a sacred right, that the right to health will be respected, that a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment is the basis for the enjoyment of a number of cultural rights as well. It's not just health, as has been pointed out in regards to the closure of the area. So there's another big agenda item in terms of how environmental law should evolve towards the future. And finally, we're out of time, but I do want to thank all the representatives of Indigenous peoples that took their time to share their views and testimonies with me in my visit to Australia, especially the elders. I feel privileged, I feel humbled, I feel honored to have had that opportunity and to have had that role as special rapporteur in my visit to their country and countries. So thank you very much for that. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur. And with this, I will join your words to thank the Parker family and to say that this definitely was a tribute to the struggle that was done by Maitland Parker. I want to thank also Mark for helping us in these contacts, and thank Yara for all the work that she's doing. We're looking forward to having the film. We're looking forward to continuing the different contacts and exchanges on this issue. So thank you very much for having taken the time for being with us, and we will stay in touch. All the best on your side.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Norton.
Bye bye from Geneva.